My house, my rules. Stepmom evicted me on Christmas. She didn't read the fine print on Dad's will. The house wasn't his to give. The iron gate of Blackwell Manor slammed shut with a sound that felt less like metal meeting metal and more like a bone breaking in the hollow of the night. I stood on the other side of the perimeter, shivering violently as the December wind whipped wet, heavy snow against my cheeks. My toolbox, the battered red metal one my father gave me when I was 12, the one with his initials scratched into the paint, landed with a heavy thud in the gray slush beside me. I heard the sickening crack of the plastic handle snapping upon impact. I looked up through the iron bars at the warm, golden glow of the front porch where Elena stood. She was wrapped in the cashmere shawl that used to belong to my mother, a garment she had pulled from a storage chest only days after the funeral. She held a glass of mulled wine in one hand, the steam rising in the frigid air, her face a mask of cruel, bored indifference. "You were just the nurse, Lena," she called out, her voice cutting through the howling wind with practiced precision. "The patient is gone. You have no reason to be here anymore. It's a liability to have non-residents on the grounds." I gripped the freezing bars of the gate, my knuckles turning white, the cold biting through my thin gloves. "I lived here for 15 years, Elena," I shouted over the gale. "I fixed every leak in that slate roof. I sanded these floors. I built that porch you're standing on with my own hands." Elena took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, savoring the warmth I was being denied. She smiled, a gesture devoid of any humor. "And you were paid for your labor, with room and board. That contract ended the moment your father's heart stopped beating. Read the will, honey. My name is on the deed. My house, my rules." She turned her back to me, the heavy oak door closing with a finality that seemed to shatter the world around me. I heard the deadbolt click, a sound I had oiled 100 times, locking me out of the only life I had ever known. My mind raced back, escaping the cold for a moment, to return to 3 weeks ago. To the cloying smell of antiseptic and fading lavender in Dad's bedroom. The storm raging outside tonight was nothing compared to the suffocating silence that had filled that room. Dad had been weak, his skin like parchment, his breathing shallow and rattling. But his eyes were frantic, wide and darting around the room, as if searching for an escape route. He had gripped my wrist with surprising strength, his calloused fingers digging into my skin, desperate to anchor himself to the world for just one more moment. "Lena," he had whispered, his voice barely a rasp, stealing the air from his own lungs. "The library. You have to go to the library. The heavy book, the blue binding." He tried to raise a trembling hand to point toward the mahogany shelves he had dusted religiously for a decade, the ones he treated with more reverence than a church altar. But his hand trembled violently and fell back to the sheets. Before I could ask him what he meant, before I could ask about the blue book, the door swung open. Elena breezed in, smelling of expensive floral perfume and fake sympathy, the scent instantly overpowering the lavender. "Oh, hush now, Robert," she cooed, her voice dripping with a sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. She placed a hand on his chest, effectively silencing him. "You're agitating him, Lena. Let the poor man rest. We can talk about books later." She ushered me out, her manicured nails digging sharply into my shoulder, steering me away from the truth. I looked back one last time as the door closed. Dad's eyes were locked on the library door, desperate, terrified, and full of a pleading I didn't understand. I never got to go back in. He died in his sleep that night, taking the secret of the blue book with him into the dark. Now, standing in the snow, I realized that silence had been the first weapon she used against me, the first brick in the wall she built to push me out. The lawyer's office, 2 days after the funeral, had smelled of old leather, dust, and impending doom. We sat across a sprawling mahogany desk, me in my work boots and flannel shirt, feeling small and out of place, Elena in a sleek black silk dress that looked more suitable for a gala than mourning. Mr. Henderson, the family attorney for 30 years, a man who had known my father well, looked pale. He shuffled the papers, his hands shaking slightly, his eyes fixed on the blotting pad as he avoided my gaze. "The last will and testament of Robert Vance," Henderson began, his voice tight and strained. "To my wife, Elena, I leave the entirety of my liquid assets, the vehicle collection, and the residency rights to Blackwell Manor." Elena let out a small, satisfied sigh, the sound of a cat that had just secured the cream. She was already pulling out her phone under the table, likely texting her real estate friends. I felt the air leave my lungs, as if I'd been punched. "Residency rights?" I asked, confusion clouding my grief. Dad always said the house was, that we were. "The house is mine," Elena snapped, cutting me off, her eyes flashing. "Stop complicating things." Henderson cleared his throat, looking physically ill, beads of sweat forming on his brow. "Mrs. Vance, did Robert provide the supplemental addendum, the one regarding the stewardship propels?" Elena's eyes flashed dangerous and sharp, like flint striking steel. "There is no addendum, Mr. Henderson. There is only this document. Stamp it and let's be done with this charade." Henderson hesitated, his pen hovering over the paper. He looked at me with profound pity, a silent apology in his eyes, then back at Elena's glare. With a defeated sigh, he pressed the stamp down. Probated. The sound echoed in the quiet office, like a gavel sentencing me to homelessness. 2 days before Christmas, the sanctity of the manor was shattered by the sound of destruction. I was in the hallway, packing my meager belongings, mostly clothes and tools, into cardboard boxes, when a loud crash echoed from the master bedroom. It sounded like wood splintering. I ran down the hall to find Elena supervising 2 hired movers, men with thick necks and careless hands. They were tossing furniture, hand-carved mahogany pieces my grandfather had built, pieces that held the soul of this house, into a duster parked on the lawn below the window. "What are you doing?" I screamed, grabbing the arm of a mover holding my dad's favorite armchair, the leather worn smooth by decades of reading. "That's not trash. That's 100 years old. That's history." Elena didn't even look up from her clipboard, where she was ticking off items. "It's rotten junk, Lena. It smells like old people and failure. If we're going to sell this place to the developers, it needs to be a blank canvas, modern, sleek. No one wants your dusty memories." "You can't sell it," I pleaded, my voice breaking. "This house is historical. It's protected. It's mine," she hissed, stepping into my personal space, her perfume suffocating me. As she turned to yell at the movers to hurry up, I spotted it. Resting precariously on the top of the pile in the dumpster, half covered by a torn curtain, was a thick, blue-bound book. My heart hammered against my ribs. While her back was turned, I snatched it, shoving it deep inside my jacket, feeling its weight against my chest like a secret heartbeat. Late that night, huddled in the drafty attic room I had slept in since I was a child, I pulled the blue book from my jacket. My hands were trembling, not just from the cold seeping through the uninsulated walls, but from pure adrenaline. The cover was worn, the leather stained with years of handling, smelling of pipe tobacco and sawdust. I opened it, expecting to find money or perhaps a secret bank account number, something that explained why Dad was so desperate. Instead, the pages were hollowed out. Inside the cavity sat a small, battered logbook and a single water-damaged photograph. The photo showed my dad, young and strong, standing in front of the unfinished manor, shaking hands with a man whose face was blurred by a coffee stain. I opened the logbook. It wasn't a diary. It was a maintenance log, meticulous and detailed. Roof repaired, August 1998. Foundation reinforced, March 2005. Boiler replaced, November 2010. Every act of labor my father had ever performed was documented, down to the cost of nails. But it was the note on the back cover that made my breath hitch in my throat. Scrawled in Dad's distinct looping handwriting were the words, "We serve at the pleasure of the architect. 12/25 expiration." Expiration? Dad died in November. December 25th was 2 days away. Suddenly, a fist pounded on my door, shaking the frame. "Pack faster," Elena shrieked from the hallway. "I want you out by sunrise on Christmas Eve. I have buyers coming, and I don't want you cluttering up the view." The next morning, the sun rose pale and weak, offering no heat. I wandered out to the garden one last time, my eyes swollen from lack of sleep. Out of habit, driven by a muscle memory I couldn't shut off, I picked up a loose slat on the perimeter fence and hammered it back into place. Why fix a fence for a woman kicking me out? Because the house didn't deserve to fall apart just because its owner was broken. The house was innocent. Integrity is a rare currency these days. A rough, gravelly voice rasped behind me. I jumped, dropping my hammer. Standing by the gate was Arthur, the local homeless man I had seen wandering the highway for years. His coat was held together by silver duct tape, his boots were split at the seams, and his beard was matted with ice. He looked frozen to the bone, a statue of neglect. "I don't have money, Arthur," I said softly, reaching for my thermos sitting on a fence post. "But I have hot coffee and a scarf." I unwrapped the thick wool scarf from my neck, my favorite one, knit by my grandmother, and handed it to him along with the thermos. He took them, his hands shaking, but his eyes were sharp, surprisingly clear and piercing blue. "You're leaving?" he asked, gesturing to the boxes stacked haphazardly on the porch. "Evicted," I admitted, shame burning my cheeks. "New management." Arthur took a long sip of the coffee, watching me closely over the rim of the cup. "And yet, you're fixing the fence. Most people would burn it down." "The house serves us," I whispered, quoting the phrase my dad used to say every morning. "We serve the house." Arthur smiled, a cryptic, knowing expression that didn't fit his ragged appearance. "Keep the faith, Lena. Storms clear. They always do." The police arrived on Christmas Eve, their lights flashing red and blue against the pristine white snow, a jarring invasion of peace. Elena hadn't just waited for me to leave, she had accelerated the timeline to ensure I was gone before her party prep began. I stood in the foyer, my bags packed, as 2 officers stepped inside, shaking snow from their boots, looking apologetic. "Ma'am, we received a call about a domestic disturbance," the older officer said, refusing to meet my eyes, focusing on a spot on the wall. "Mrs. Vance claims you threatened her safety, that you were violent." "Threatened her?" I laughed, a bitter, jagged sound that scraped my throat. "I'm 5'4" and holding a box of books. She's the one destroying the property. She's the one throwing away history." Elena appeared at the top of the stairs, pressing a lace handkerchief to dry eyes, a perfect picture of the distressed widow. "She's unstable, officer. She said she'd burn the house down before she let me sell it. Please, I just want to feel safe in my own home on Christmas. Is that too much to ask?" It was a masterclass in manipulation. The officer sighed, shifting his belt. "We can't have threats, ma'am. You need to vacate the premises immediately. Don't make us put you in cuffs." They escorted me out like a criminal. I didn't fight. I didn't scream. I just walked to my rusted pickup truck as Elena watched from the window, a silhouette of triumph. As I reversed down the long driveway, tears blurring my vision, I saw a crew hammering a sign into the frozen lawn. "For sale, prime development land, cash buyers only." Sal's Diner was a beacon of neon, buzzing in the void of the highway, the O in open flickering like a dying heartbeat. It was the only place open on Christmas Eve, a refuge for long-haul truckers and people with nowhere else to go.
I sat in the back booth, the red vinyl cracked and taped, counting the crumpled bills in my pocket. $42. That was my net worth. That was the sum of my life. The bell above the door jingled, letting in a gust of freezing air. Arthur walked in, still wearing my scarf wrapped tightly around his neck. The waitress, a tired woman named Betty, with kindness etched into her wrinkles, sighed and started to walk around the counter to shoo him out. "He's with me," I called out, my voice cracking. I waved Arthur over. "Put his meal on my tab, Betty. I've got enough for one last round of grilled cheese and tomato soup." Betty softened, nodding. "You're a saint, Lena, even when you're down." Arthur sat opposite me, unwrapping the scarf. He looked at my red-rimmed eyes and the broken toolbox on the seat beside him. "You look like a woman who lost a kingdom, Lena." "I lost a home," I corrected, staring into my coffee. "Kingdoms are for royalty. I was just the help. I was just the ghost in the walls." The diner was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the sizzle of the grill. I don't know why I told him. Maybe because I had no one else. Maybe because strangers are easier to talk to than empty rooms. I told Arthur everything, the will, the cruelty, the eviction, the feeling of failure. "And the worst part," I whispered, pulling the blue book from my bag, "is that Dad left me this, a maintenance log, like he wanted me to remember how much work we did for nothing." I slid the water-damaged photo across the Formica table. He died trying to tell me about this. Arthur picked up the photo. His hands, usually shaking with what I assumed was age or withdrawal, were suddenly steady as stone. He stared at the image of my father and the blurred man. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, transforming him from a vagrant to something else entirely. "I remember that handshake," Arthur said softly, his voice losing his rasp. "Robert had a grip like iron. He looked me in the eye and promised he would protect the heart of the house." I froze, my spoon halfway to my mouth. You knew my father?" Arthur looked up. The cloudiness in his eyes was gone. In its place was a piercing, commanding intelligence that demanded attention. "I didn't just know him, Lena. I hired him." I stared at the homeless man across from me, trying to process his words, my brain misfiring. Before I could speak, headlights swept across the diner windows, bright, blinding LED lights that cut through the gloom. A sleek, black limousine pulled up to the curb of this greasy roadside spoon, looking completely out of place next to the rusted semi-trucks. The driver, a man built like a tank in a tailored suit, stepped out into the snow. He ignored the stunned look of the waitress and walked straight to our booth. He didn't look at me. He looked at Arthur. "Sir," the driver said, bowing his head slightly, "the board is waiting. The paperwork is ready for execution." Arthur stood up. He reached up and peeled off the matted gray beard. It was a high-quality prosthetic. He wiped his face with a napkin, standing straighter, growing taller as he shed the slump of the streets. He shed the duct-taped coat to reveal a vest made of material that probably cost more than my truck. He looked down at me, extending a hand that was clean and manicured. "I'm not hungry for grilled cheese anymore, Lena, and I suspect you aren't either." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a black card made of heavy platinum. "Betty, the bill, please, and tip the house $5,000 for the hospitality." The ride in the limousine was silent and smooth, a stark contrast to the rattling suspension of my truck. We drove into the city, stopping at a glass spire that pierced the night sky. Arthur led me to the penthouse office, where the city lights looked like scattered diamonds below us, a world away from the cold diner. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid into crystal tumblers. "My name is Arthur Blackwell," he said, taking a sip, the liquid catching the light. "My grandfather built the manor. I inherited it 40 years ago. But I hated the life, the leeches, the fake friends, the women like Elena who only wanted the name and the status." He walked to the window, looking out over his empire. "So I disappeared. I became the eccentric recluse. I needed someone to care for the house, not own it. I hired Robert because he was the only man who wiped his boots before entering the foyer. He respected the wood. So Dad didn't own the house? I asked, feeling the floor tilt beneath me. No, Arthur said, turning around, his silhouette sharp against the city. He was the life tenant. He kept up the pretense to protect my privacy. Elena married a caretaker, thinking she had trapped a millionaire. He slammed a thick file on the mahogany desk. But she just evicted the caretaker's daughter, and that triggers the default clause. Arthur opened the file and spun it toward me. It was the original deed, yellowed with age but legally pristine. He pointed to a paragraph at the bottom, printed in font so small you'd need a magnifying glass to read it. Clause 4. The resident caretaker holds the property in trust. They may not transfer, sell, or evict family members who contribute to the preservation of the estate without the architect's written consent. Any violation of this trust results in immediate termination of the life estate and all associated privileges. The fine print, Arthur said with a wolfish grin. Your father tried to warn you. The blue book? It wasn't just a log. It was the proof of your contribution. By fixing the roof, by tending the garden, you became a vested beneficiary. So what does this mean? I asked, tracing my father's signature on the page with a trembling finger. Arthur leaned forward. It means that the moment she kicked you out, the house reverted to me. Elena isn't the owner.
Technically, she's currently trespassing on private property, and I am in desperate need of a new property manager. Christmas morning dawned crisp and blindingly white. While the rest of the world opened gifts, Blackwell Manor was a hive of frantic, superficial activity. Elena was hosting a farewell brunch, a thinly veiled auction for the city's developers and elite to bid on the land before she flattened the house. Caterers rushed in and out with trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played in the corner of the room where my father's reading chair used to sit. Elena held court in the center, wearing a red silk dress that screamed victory, sipping champagne. Yes, we plan to demolish the main structure by February, she told a man in a pinstripe suit, laughing lightly. The land alone is worth millions. The house is just old wood. It's a teardown. I thought this place was historically protected, the investor asked, glancing at the intricate crown molding. Elena laughed, tossing her head back. Money rewrites history, darling. Besides, who was going to stop me? The help? A security guard, one she had hired to keep the riffraff out, tapped her on the shoulder. He looked pale, his earpiece buzzing. Ma'am, you might want to come to the window. There's a convoy blocking the main gate. The gravel driveway crunched under the weight of 3 massive black SUVs and a police cruiser. The convoy stopped right in front of the grand staircase. The guests drifted toward the windows and the porch, champagne flutes in hand, whispering excitedly. They assumed it was a VIP buyer, someone with deep pockets. The door of the lead SUV opened. I stepped out. I wasn't wearing my flannel or my work boots. Arthur had insisted on a stop at a designer boutique that opened just for him at 4 a.m. I wore a tailored charcoal suit, sharp and commanding, with a long wool coat that swept around my ankles. I looked up at the house, my house, and felt a surge of power I had never known. Elena stormed out onto the porch, her face twisting in confusion and rage. What is this? What are you doing here? She pointed a shaking finger at me. I told you to leave. Officer, arrest this girl for harassment. She's trespassing. The police chief, the actual chief, not the patrol officer from last night, stepped out of the cruiser. He adjusted his hat calmly. We aren't here for her, Mrs. Vance. The rear door of the limo opened, and Arthur stepped out. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of wealthy elites on the porch. These people knew money, they knew power, and they recognized the man who had been a ghost for decades. That's Arthur Blackwell, a developer whispered loudly. I thought he was dead. I thought he died in the Alps.
Elena looked between me and Arthur, her confidence wavering for the first time. "Who is this hobo?" she scoffed, trying to regain control, trying to spin the narrative. "Is this your boyfriend, Lena? Did you pick him up under a bridge?" A woman in furs near the door laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "That hobo owns half the commercial real estate in the city, you idiot. That's the landlord." Arthur walked up the steps, his cane tapping rhythmically against the stone. He stopped 2 steps below Elena, yet somehow he looked down on her. He reached into his coat and pulled out a document stamped with the city seal. "You didn't read page 47, did you, Elena?" Arthur asked, his voice carrying over the silent crowd. Arthur didn't wait for an answer. He turned to the crowd, treating them like a jury in a courtroom. "Robert Vance held this property in trust," he announced, his voice booming. "Upon his death, stewardship was to pass to the individual who demonstrated the spirit of preservation." Elena crossed her arms, trying to look unimpressed. "Robert left it to me. I was his wife. I have rights." "Robert couldn't leave you what he didn't own," Arthur countered coolly. He pulled a remote from his pocket and pointed it at the large television screen Elena had set up to showcase the demolition plans. The screen flickered, then showed grainy footage from a security camera hidden in the garden. It was dated yesterday. It showed me, shivering in the cold, fixing the fence with my own scarf wrapped around the homeless man nearby. Then it cut to footage of Elena screaming at me to stop wasting money on garbage. Arthur looked at me, then back to the crowd. The house chooses the tenant. The deed requires care, not ownership. The house chooses Lena. The silence on the porch was deafening. Elena's face turned a violent shade of crimson. "This is ridiculous," she shrieked, losing her complete composure. "I have spousal rights. I lived here for 2 years. You can't just kick me out." Mr. Henderson, the lawyer from the reading, stepped out from the crowd of guests. He looked relieved, finally unburdened of his secret. "Actually, Mrs. Vance, I tried to warn you about the supplemental addendum during the reading. You told me to shut up. You were quite explicit." "You're fired," she screamed at him, spit flying. "You can't fire me," Henderson said calmly, adjusting his glasses, "because you aren't the executor anymore. Since the house wasn't Robert's asset, it is not marital property. It belongs to Mr. Blackwell, and Mr. Blackwell signed it over to a trust at 3 a.m. this morning." He pointed at me. "A trust managed solely by Miss Lena Vance." Elena looked at me, realizing she had zero claim. The money, the house, the land, it was all smoke. She lunged at me, her nails curved like claws, a desperate animal. She never reached me. 2 of Archer's security detail stepped in, blocking her path with the solidity of a brick wall. Elena bounced off them, stumbling back in her high heels, looking small and pathetic. Arthur stepped forward, his voice dropping to a terrifying chill. "You evicted a tenant illegally in the middle of a snowstorm on Christmas Eve. I am evicting a trespasser from a warm house in broad daylight. I think I'm being incredibly generous given the circumstances." He checked his watch, a Patek Philippe that glinted in the winter sun. "You have 10 minutes to vacate the premises. Anything you cannot carry in your arms stays with the house." 10 minutes, she gasped. "But my clothes, my jewelry, my collection." "You mean my mother's jewelry?" Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Security will escort you to your room. 1 bag, Elena. Choose wisely." 5 minutes later, Elena came stumbling out the front door. She was wearing a fur coat over her dress and clutching a heavy wooden jewelry box to her chest. She looked like a cornered animal, her hair disheveled. "I'm leaving," she shouted. "Are you happy now?" I stepped into her path. "Stop." She sneered, trying to summon 1 last ounce of venom. "Get out of my way." Arthur nodded to the police chief. "Officer, if that box contains the Blackwell emeralds, that constitutes grand larceny. That's a felony with a mandatory prison sentence." Elena's eyes darted to the police, then to me. With a trembling hand, she unlatched the box. Inside glittered the emerald necklace and diamond brooches she had been wearing earlier. They weren't gifts from Dad. They were heirlooms found in the safe. Blackwell heirlooms. "Drop it," I said. She stared at me with pure hatred, then let the box fall. It hit the porch with a clatter, jewels spilling onto the stone, sparkling in the snow like fallen stars. The guests, the very people she had tried to impress, the people whose approval she craved, were now pulling out their phones. Camera flashes went off like strobes. They weren't filming the house anymore. They were filming the downfall. "Get off my property," I said, repeating the words she had used on me, reclaiming them. Elena turned and ran down the stairs. In her haste, her heel caught on a patch of ice. She slipped, sprawling hard onto the snowy driveway, the exact same slush pile she had thrown my clothes into the night before. Laughter rippled through the crowd. It was cruel, perhaps, but it felt like the universe balancing the scales. She sat up, wet and shivering, mascara running down her face. She looked at her luxury car parked nearby. "The keys to the Mercedes are in the house," Arthur called out. "And since the car was purchased with funds from the estate account, it stays." She screamed, a primal sound of frustration and defeat. "Where am I supposed to go?" I watched her shivering in the snow. I remembered exactly how that cold felt. I remembered the fear of having nowhere to go. I looked at Arthur. He gave me a slight nod. "Your house, your rules." I walked down the stairs. The crowd went silent, expecting me to yell, to gloat, to kick her while she was down. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a key. It was a rusted, single key on a plain ring. "My truck is parked at the gate," I said, holding it out to her. "It has a heater. The tires are good. It's fully gassed up." Elena stared at the key as if it were an insult. "You're giving me that junk?" I said firmly, placing the key in her freezing palm. "It's a ride, it's warm, and it's more than you gave me." She looked at the faces of the crowd, seeing no sympathy, only judgment. Defeated, she snatched the key from my hand without a word of thanks. She trudged toward the gate, a broken figure in the snow, disappearing into the gray afternoon. An hour later, the guests were gone. The caterers had packed up. The silence returned to Blackwell Manor, but this time it didn't feel oppressive. It felt expectant, like a held breath. I stood in the grand foyer with Arthur. The house felt massive, almost overwhelming in its emptiness. "Why me?" I asked, my voice echoing off the marble. "You could have sold this place for millions, Arthur. You could have turned it into a hotel. Why give it to the carpenter's daughter?" Arthur walked over to the window, looking out at the snow-covered garden where the fence stood straight and true. "I watched you for 10 years, Lena. I was the bum by the gate more often than you knew. You fixed the roof when no one was looking. You fed a homeless man when you were hungry yourself." He turned to me, his expression serious. "You are the only Blackwell left, in spirit. A house without a heart is just a pile of bricks. You are the heart." I walked through the halls, my heels clicking on the hardwood, reclaiming the space. I stopped at the library door, the one Dad had tried to point to. I opened it. It was dusty, filled with shadows and the smell of old paper. "I'm not living here alone," I said, the idea forming instantly, clear as crystal. "It's too big for one person. It's too selfish." "What do you propose?" Arthur asked, leaning on his cane in the doorway. "The East Wing," I said, pointing down the hall. "We turn it into a shelter. Not a warehouse, but a home. For the elderly who lost their houses to developers. For people like Arthur pretended to be. We give them dignity." Arthur smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "And the West Wing?" "A museum," I decided, to fund the shelter. We show the history, we show the work, we show that the carpenter matters as much as the architect. I walked to the mantel and placed the blue book, my father's log, in the center. It wasn't trash, it was the foundation of everything. That evening, I sat by the fire, opening the back page of the blue book again. There was a folded piece of paper tucked into the binding that I had missed before. It was a letter from Dad, dated a month before he died. "Lena, I know she will try to take it. She sees the gold leaf, but she doesn't see the rot beneath. I also know you will feed the birds even when the hawk is circling. I served the architect, but you served the home. Remember, ownership is just paper. Kindness is the only deed that matters. If you are reading this, the storm has passed. Love, Dad. Tears finally fell, hot and fast. He knew everything, and he trusted me to fight the war he couldn't win. He didn't leave me a fortune, he left me a test, and I had passed. A soft knock echoed from the heavy front door, pulling me from my thoughts. It was exactly 1 year later, Christmas Eve. The manor was glowing, but not with a pretentious party. The east wing was full of laughter, the smell of roasting turkey, and warmth. I walked to the massive oak door and pulled it open. Standing on the porch was a young couple. Their car was smoking at the bottom of the driveway, steam rising into the night. They looked frozen, terrified, holding a baby wrapped in a thin blanket. The snow swirled around them, just as it had around me a year ago. "I'm so sorry to bother you," the man stammered, looking at the grandeur of the house, intimidated. "Our car died. We don't have anywhere to go. We don't have money for a hotel." I looked at them. I looked at the dark, cold night behind them. I didn't ask for ID. I didn't ask for money. I stepped back and opened the door wide, letting the golden light spill out onto the snow, melting the ice. "Come in," I said, smiling, feeling the house breathe around me. My house, my rules. The man hesitated. "What are the rules?" "Rule number 1, I said, ushering them into the warmth. No one stays out in the cold."